Hey everybody, Jay Weidner here. Thanks for coming back to Reality Check. I know that I've been off and on here the last couple of months. I've been preparing for the UFO con that I went to last weekend, which was really great. Got to spend a lot of time with people that are, really big in the field, like Daniel Brinkley and Johnny Enoch and Jordan Maxwell. We had a lot of conversations, and a lot of the stuff that we talk about on the show we were talking about. And I gave my talk on UFOs and cults. I don't really know much about UFOs. I don't really follow them, but I think people received it really well. If you like the show, share it and like it. Really appreciate it. Today, we're going to have a really, really interesting show. As you guys know, I've been reading this book, Madhouse, which is about insane asylums in the 1800s in the United States. And as I was reading the book, I got sent this guy in the mail. And it was like an incredible synchronicity because I was reading about these things, and then this book comes. And actually, what Madhouse was doing to me was I'm asking myself, why? Why are there so many insane people in the 1800s that they have to build these gigantic insane asylums all over the country, hundreds of them? They're giant, and they house thousands and thousands of people. And also the question becomes, well, psychiatry really hasn't been born yet, so who's declaring these people insane and why? And then, of course, the means of which they tortured these people was also extremely interesting. But so today my guest is Gerry Marzinski. Is that how you pronounce it, Jerry?
Yeah, Marzinski.
Marzinsky? Gerry Marzinski. And he is the co-writer with Sherry Sweeney of this book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. And what I like about this book is that it not only IDs the problem that we're having, but it actually has some answers, which are very rare in this day. So, Jerry, before we begin, why don't you tell us about yourself and, who you are and how you got interested in the subject?
Ooh. Well, I was a licensed psychotherapist for many years. I started my career at the largest state hospital in the world, Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, Georgia. I think there were at one point like 23,000 patients there. It was the size of a city. It was like being in an ocean of insanity. But at that point, I was young and kind of stupid, and I was interested in abnormal psychology. And for me, it was like a candy store. But things right away didn't start making sense. I'd look at psychiatry, and they would say, this is a chemical imbalance that's causing that. And I'd ask the psychiatrist, what causes this? Why is this? And virtually all of them said it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. But then I watched what they were doing, and they didn't give any tests to find out what that imbalance was. They just said there is an imbalance, and it was real clear they were taking their instructions from the drug representatives that just constantly flooded the institution and gave them free lunches. And
that's for sure.
But here they're giving them a wide variety of different psychoactive drugs that affect different neurotransmitters. But yet they had no blood tests. They had no way to tell what that imbalance was, what was imbalanced, which neurotransmitters were imbalanced. They didn't even know what the neurotransmitter balance of the brain was. They didn't have any idea what the proper neurotransmitter balance of the brain was.
Okay. So, with that in mind, I'm gonna read the beginning of your really good book, because I think it sets the scene for what you're saying. Since the dawn of civilization, a strange and malevolent affliction has stalked humanity. Its etiology an elusive mystery, like a viper that strikes in the night. Its approach is undetectable, its venom invisible, its presence evident only by the long trail of human carnage strewn in its wake. It is an illness so horrific that 1 out of 10 of its victims will kill themselves to escape it, while the remaining will die 3 times earlier than the rest of us. Its incidence is increasing, that's for sure. At present, it is destroying about 23 million people a year worldwide. The World Health Organization has declared it to be among the world's top 10 health problems, yet research funding is minuscule. The Wall Street Journal reported that the NIMH responded to this deficiency by manipulating the statistics. With the change of the National Institute of Mental Health website in 2017, 2 million people with this illness simply disappeared. This disease actually speaks to its victims as it slowly kills them. That's a really important sentence. For countless decades, doctors have stubbornly refused to listen to patients who report this. Such might be understandable if the tormentor's tidings were unintelligible, but in many instances, this is not the case. Hundreds of patients described an unrelenting barrage of sinister and malicious messages delivered in complete and coherent sentences. Almost done here. These relenting assaults, coupled with refusal of medical providers and others to believe what patients are experiencing, leaves these individuals feeling trapped, alone, misunderstood, and desperate. With the realization that no one comprehends what they are undergoing, their anguish mounts. Desperate for any means to escape their intense suffering, 4 out of every 10 will attempt suicide. 1 out of every 4 will succeed. Added to the weirdness surrounding this affliction, we find another freakish correlation. The Journey of the American Medical Association published a study that reveals a suicide rate 5.9 or 6 pretty much times higher than the general population for doctors who specialize in the treatment of this disorder. One of the most frustrating aspects of this scourge is its abject refusal to loosen its grip on its victims. Descriptions of this illness date back to 2000 BC across several cultures, the oldest being the Egyptian Ebers Papyrus. Since that time, medical science has searched in vain for a physical cure for this malevolent mental illness known as paranoid schizophrenia, the most prevalent and devastating of psychotic disorders. This is the book. Get it? So I read the book, and it's really well done because I think the way that you eventually married science with esoteric matters and showed in your book how we're really dealing with almost a spiritual problem here. And what I did after I read your book, Jerry, was I went out and not scientific or anything, just where my friends are, at the hot springs, at the coffee shop, wherever I go, and I just asked them, guys, hey, do you hear voices in your head? And I was surprised, first off, how many people did. I had no idea. Normal people I love, actually, had voices in their head that were malicious, and talking to them and telling them bad things. And I asked them, because I have a voice in my head. It's Jay, my higher self maybe, or something. And it tells me when I screw up, it tells me, well, what'd you do that for? Go apologize to that guy. You shouldn't have said that, right? Or whatever. Or it tells me when I do a good thing. Oh man, you're awesome. You wrote 4 chapters today in your book. That's awesome, man. Give yourself a pat on the back. But that's not what these people were reporting. They were reporting a malicious barrage of negative comments that they thought were themselves. Almost universally, they thought that these voices were themselves. And then when I read your book, I connected it to one of my favorite subjects, which is the Gnostic idea of Archons, or spiritual parasites, who want to drive us into a negative state so they can feed off that negative energy. And I realized that, what you had discovered, these voices, these malevolent voices, was the key to how the Archons are in control of us, most of us. And then I started thinking about the warnings that the Gnostics gave about not doing certain things because you'll open yourself up to these forces. and how because I'd been studying Gnosticism my whole life, I kind of made sure that I never got involved in Ouija boards or black magic or anything like that. And but the people that were hearing the voices told me, again, not scientific or anything, but they had played around with these forces at an early age. And so I wonder if you know, the warnings from the Gnostics from 2,500 years ago aren't true, that, you know, you play around with these forces and you let them in, and once you let them in, it seems like they increase and double and triple in size, and pretty soon you've got 4 or 5 and 15, 20 voices all telling you how horrible you are, how ugly you are, how you're nothing, you're stupid. I listen to these people telling me what the voices say, and they're almost universally the same things. They say about the same 15 things, it sounds like. You're ugly, you're stupid, you're not worth it, you should go kill yourself, these kinds of things. And so I think you actually in some ways may have unlocked the Archon problem in a way, that these voices are not you. And when I told people that, oh, you said something else in your book, which I need to be repeating. When I told these people, my friends and family, that I didn't hear voices, they didn't believe me. And you said that in your book, that people who hear voices don't believe that there are people who don't hear voices. And they didn't believe me. I said, honestly, I'm telling you the truth. I don't hear any voices in my head, certainly not any voices telling me that are malicious. So I think that in a way you've done us a lot of good, because I think when I told my friends and family that the voices aren't you, those are outside entities that somehow have gotten into your system, and you need to like tell them that they're liars, and you need to tell them to go away. I don't need you. I want you to go split, you know? And so I think that's why I wanted you on the show more than anything, was because I think that you have in some ways advanced the idea that the Archons are there. They're malicious. They want to drive you insane, but you can get rid of them, right?
Right. So you covered an awful lot of ground there, and I'm like, you know, each sentence I could have branched off somewhere else. But
Good, do it.
Thinking is the root of it all. So everybody's got a voice in their head talking to them. You can hear it, and people think that's who they are. That's a huge mistake, because you can sit back and you can watch these voices come into your head and observe them. You know, check in and say, well, what am I thinking right now? What am I thinking right now? So if you can observe these things, if you can step back and observe your thoughts, then they're not you. You know, who's the watcher? You know, you're the one watching those thoughts. Now, the second question is, where do they come from?
Right.
Okay, and they come from 2 different sources. One is your memories, which keep repeating over and over again. And I think Joe Dispenza said, if you're thinking, you're running a program.
Right.
And that program is based on how you were raised and things that happened to you. And if you see something outside that triggers that, you're running that program. The other thing is what is it that triggers those memories to come up? What is it that triggers the thoughts that come up? Because you don't know what the next thought you're going to have is. I mean, it comes up, and most of it comes from the subconscious, because you can't predict your next thought. You know, you go, what's my next thought? You don't know. So what is it that brings these things up? You can bring them up from memory. So, you know, all the bad memories, all the good, whatever, you can say, okay, I want to think about this, and that'll come up. But when you're just walking around and, you know, paying attention to stuff, and here's all these thoughts that keep filling your head, what is it that is bringing those up? Okay, so those are coming from the subconscious. And you kind of go, well, what is it that's choosing those thoughts? Because you're not consciously doing it. So what happens is these entities, and Carlos Castaneda talks about that.
Yes, he does.
And he all the way through his series, yeah, he talks about, and he keeps alluding to it, and at the very end he said, they give us their minds. Okay, so what these people are hearing is, like you said, it's a consistently, unswervingly negative stream of information about themselves and everybody else. And it warps their perception of things. And why do they do that? I didn't know until one day I was working at the prison, and I thought it was because of the amount of anxiety that these things create. And if you have these voices, and what they do is they start inside your head, and when they get stronger, they move outside and they start talking to these patients like from the outside. At that point, they know that it's not in their heads. I mean, they're talking to them from the outside like somebody's talking to you. What I noticed was that after these attacks by the voices, the patients were greatly weakened. And some of them said they were so weak they couldn't even get out of bed after being attacked by these voices all night. And they had no idea why that was. They saw the correlation, but they couldn't make the link between the voices and their energy levels dropping. And I saw the link, but I thought it was due to the anxiety. Then one day I was put over they call it the Central Detention Unit, which was a jail for the entire prison. So the worst of the worst went there. And one day I showed up in my office at the psych unit, and here's a call comes in from the captain of the Central Detention Unit saying, listen, we got a completely psychotic fella in a cell with another inmate, and he's scaring the bejesus out of this guy. You need to come over here and do something about that. About the same time, I went to my mailbox, and here's a letter from the cellmate of this psychotic guy saying, hey, listen, I need your help. You need to do something about this. So I went over there, and I pulled up the guy who was, he was sane, and I looked at his background first, and what he had done was snitched off the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a big gang in the prison, and he had snitched off one of their drug deals. And the warden broke them up, sent them to prisons all over the state, and confiscated all their drugs. So they were furious. They wanted this guy dead. He was a snitch, and they wanted him dead so bad that they were doing things to get thrown into the Central Detention Unit so they could have a chance to get at him. And then they were shooting these notes under their door, and I still can't figure out how they do this. I've seen it happen from the control section. There would be a string with a note on it, and they would throw it, and it would go like maybe 25 yards right in underneath the door of an inmate cell across the way. And it happened so fast, it would be like boom, boom. The note would be delivered and the string would come back, and I'm like, whoa. Still don't know how they did it. But they were sending him these notes saying, you're dead. You come out of there, you're dead. We're here waiting for you. And here he is locked with a psychotic, floridly psychotic guy, not on any meds. He's standing over him at like 3 a.m, just looking down at him. And he looks up, and here's a psychotic guy just staring at him. You can't be under more stress than that. So I pulled him up, and I watched as he came out of the cell, and he kind of bounded up the stairs and walked briskly to the interview office. And I spoke to him for 45 minutes. And yeah, they were after him. He was in bad shape. He was scared, and the amount of pressure on him was incredible. But his energy level was still pretty good. Next, I brought in the psychotic guy, watched him come up the steps, and he could just barely make it up. I mean, it was like he had lead boots on, and he was grabbing the rail, and he just kind of shuffled into the office, and his affect was dull. He didn't have any life in his face. He looked like he'd been drained. And, I'm like, okay, this is a perfect experimental situation. Here's 2 inmates in the same cell being fed the same food under the same conditions. Everything else was equalized except for their states. And the psychotic guy was so drained, he could barely make it up the steps. And the other guy was, he had plenty of energy. So after those 2 interviews, I walked out of there and I went, that's not it. It's not because of the anxiety. It's not because of the tension of these voices. Something else is going on. And, I wasn't sure what that was, but I clearly saw it. And that theory was blown sky high nobody else is curious about this kind of stuff. I mean, nobody else asked, what the voices are saying to these guys. Psychiatry just comes up and goes, we hereby pronounce that they are hallucinations, and it is so because we say so. The patient tries to tell them these are not hallucinations. These things are talking to me, and they go, we don't want to hear it. You're crazy. You're psychotic. We don't want to know anything about their hallucinations, and take these meds and shut up. And if you keep talking about it, we'll drug you more. So I followed up from there with the, some things happened prior to that. Let me go a step or two earlier. Is I was experimenting with ways, I knew the voices were the cause of this, but I didn't know how they operated. So when I first started into this, it was like entering another world where I didn't have any cognitive map of what was going on there. It was just some very strange and scary stuff going on. And I found out the voices reacted vehemently to the repetition of the 23rd Psalm. And one inmate told me it was like throwing worms on a hot frying pan. That's the sensation he got when he repeated the 23rd Psalm. So my philosophy the whole time was that these things are, or whatever they are, destroying these patients, and anything I can do to make them more miserable, to create more pressure on them, I was going to tell the patient to do that. And I couldn't get away with that at the state hospital where I worked because the psychiatrists were kind of afraid of these patients. They didn't want anybody stirring them up any more than they had to. And I got in trouble there a couple of times for asking patients about their voices. And I was brought into the psychiatrist's office and said, these are hallucinations. You're making the patient worse by asking about them. Stop it. I got enough problems without you stirring up these patients. And yeah, the voices didn't like me asking about them. Then when I got to the prison, the noise level in there, asking about voices didn't even break the ambient noise level in that place. They had a lot more serious problems than, some psych guy asking about the patient's voices. But what I found out when I started asking about them is every once in a while, the patient would report to me, the voices were telling them not to tell me anything because I already knew too much. And I'm going, this is a hallucination saying that? And these were different patients. These were different inmates. And I'm like, what is going on there? So going along, what I would do is anything I saw that would interfere with these things, I would try it. And in the prison, the voices would kick up because that's one of the things I used to tell whether what I was doing was working or not. Did they get upset about it? If they got upset in the state prison or in the state hospital, I'd be in trouble. But everybody was upset in the prison. Everybody, staff, prisoners, everybody was always upset there. So started handing out the 23rd Psalm and saying, repeat this every time the voices come. Every single inmate said, yeah, the voices hated it. They reacted badly to it. They wanted them to stop.
Do you have any idea why that works?
I think when you talk about frequency and vibration, you're talking about these voices are at a very low frequency. And the 23rd Psalm is a very high frequency. And so it's like mixing fire and water. They don't want anything to do with prayer, churches. They hate preachers.
Right.
They hate psychiatrists. They hate any kind of positive spiritual anything they'll try to steer the person away from. But then they'll try to direct them toward murder mysteries and novels and war, horror stuff, just like you see today. You look at the movies they're putting out today.
Yeah.
It's all horrible stuff.
It's been horrible for 50 years.
Yeah.
I was in the movie business. In fact, after a long day of working on a horror film in the mid 80s in Hollywood, we spent the entire day. It was 108 degrees in the San Fernando Valley, and we were filming a knifing of a woman. And it took all day to film the knifing. And as I got in the car, I was sweaty and I had fake blood all over my hands. I had to go home, take a shower and all that. As I'm driving away from this, I said, that's it. I'm never doing this again. This is so negative. I can't believe it. And I walked away from Hollywood at that point because of that. And I truly believe, and I wanted to talk to you about this, not just Hollywood, but the media too, is it's almost as if they're black magicians. I don't mean black magicians, like, I mean like dark sorcerers. And they're weaving a tapestry that creates voices, or it seems to attract the voices in, because you'll talk to people and you'll realize that they're listening to the news and they're taking everything literally, and that's literally driving them crazy. And they're hearing these voices saying, oh my God, you know, the Russians are taking over our country. The Russians are taking over our country. And you're like, wait a minute, where's your evidence for this, right? And evidence doesn't matter, because it's just all this insanity. And then you look, of course, at the increasing homeless problem, which I think only Dr. Drew has really been honest about, which is that it's actually a mental illness problem and it's spreading. And so let me ask you a question. I've always had this kind of idea that mental illness is contagious, and that if you hang out with mentally ill people, you will become mentally ill. And I was just wondering if you agree with that, and what the mechanism of that might be.
That's an interesting question. There was a period of time when all this stuff was happening to me, you know, like as I was trying these different tactics where you know, I thought maybe I was going insane, you know. And I think I read, I think it was Reich or Young, where when he was studying schizophrenia, he thought he was going insane too. But the strange things started happening. The more I came up with tactics to interfere with these voices, they would constantly tell the patients, well, he's crazy, he's stupid, he's nuts, he's insane, don't listen to anything he's saying, he's a wacko, get out of his office and you know, stay away from him. The more I learned, and if the patient would follow through with these things, the better they became. So I had a number of patients start telling me that the voices were warning them to stay away from me, not to do what I said, not to show up for appointments. And then one day, one guy I was working with, one prisoner, he comes in and he says, the voices want to talk to you. And that never happened before. You know, it's like I said, do they want to talk to me personally? And he goes, yeah, they want to talk to you. And normally what happened is, you know, the patient would be the intermediary. You know, I'd say, okay, what are the voices saying in response to what you did this week? Or what are the voices saying to you now? They would always act as the intermediary. This time it was like they want to speak directly to you. And it kind of weirded me out.
I'll bet.
So I said, okay, come on in and tell me what they have to say. So he comes in, he sits down, he looks at me, and his voice changes just a little bit, got a little bit deeper, and these words came out of his mouth. And this is where my denial system that it's been tattered, just completely collapsed. It just completely collapsed. These words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I'm like,
whoa.
It was like the Twilight Zone, you know. And
wow.
the inmate says, that wasn't me. Those weren't my words. You know, I didn't say those. That was the voices said that. You know? And it was like a warning, you know, hey, back off. So I didn't back off. And with the same guy, I got to reading Miguel Ruiz's book. He's a shaman, and he was talking about something very similar, just like you did with the Archons. But I didn't even know about Archons back then. I wasn't even familiar with them at all. And he talked about these things being energy parasites. And that clicked with what I had been observing. So I brought that book into the prison, and I brought the same guy back whose voices had warned me. And I said, I have a page here I'd like to read to you, and I'd like your opinion on what it says. So I was always asking these guys questions. You know, what are the voices saying? How upset are they? I mean, it was always it took years to figure out how to talk to them, but once you could, you know, and they trusted you, they tell you with all this stuff. But normal people that are psychiatrists, that's the last person they talk to, and it was hard because they didn't trust psychs to start with, you know, because all the trouble they've had with them. So as I was reading this thing, soon as I hit the part where these things were energy parasites, this guy got this glazed look on his face, and he's just staring at me. His face kind of went white, and it's just this hypnotic stare. And then I heard this loud electrical crackling right behind my head. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? I turn around, and this crackling is moving to the right, up the right wall, and it's crackling all the way up the right wall. Crack, 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 crack. Just like an arc welder. It was as loud as an arc welder. And it just moved all the way up the wall. And I was freaked out. It was like, I looked at this guy and I go, uh-oh, he's going to attack. And I pushed my chair back against the back wall, so if he comes at me, I could kick him. All they had in those, covering the medical unit at that time, they put female guards there. So, you know, by the time anything happened, I mean, it was already going to, you're on your own, basically.
Right.
So I'm looking at for whatever's causing this crackle, but I'm afraid to take my eyes off of this guy because he's got this weird look on his face, and I'm like, got this, all the red lights are going off in my head. You know, this guy's going to attack. And I'm glancing back and forth between the crackling and this guy. And the noise crackles up to the ceiling and crosses the ceiling on the office right over his head, and then comes down the left wall, and I see nothing. I smell nothing, but it lasted for 20, 30 seconds. I mean,
wow.
No doubt, it wasn't just like a little blurb. I mean, it just went on and on and on. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I'm kind of freaked out. And then it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can at my right leg, and it's crackling in there. And I look down into that trash can, there's nothing in there. The inmate porter had cleaned it last night. All it was a plastic bag, and it's empty, and there's this crackling going on in there. And then it just suddenly stops. And I'm like, what just happened? And I'm looking at this guy, and he's staring at me, and then he gets up very slowly, almost rigidly, and he says, I gotta go. And I'm like, yeah, go, get out of here, get away from me. You know, and he shuffles down the hall, and it was like somebody hit me in the head with a baseball bat. It was like,
yeah, well, that's that goes in with with my theory that we're actually, it actually comes from a person that you quote in your book, Emanuel Swedenborg. And what that is I have this theory that there's an invisible earth that surrounds this earth, and this earth is made of plasma, okay, and it's electrical in nature, and these beings are electrical in nature. They're alive and they have intelligence, but they're invisible, and they live and they surround us all the time. Yes. And these are the beings that are getting in and saying things because they're drawing energy out of the situation.
That's
and when they realize that they can't draw any information or any energy from you, they leave. They don't waste much time. Well, if they find out if they can, and then they go. And they are electrical in nature, and they've even been photographed. There are ways with infrared and ultraviolet cameras, and I'm working on several projects right now that you can actually photograph these things in the right conditions. It's difficult, but you actually witnessed one of these parasites escaping the guy, bouncing around the room, and then shorting itself out on the plastic Rubbermaid basket. That's what it was doing there, was shorting itself out. So that means that whatever you were doing is the right thing.
What triggered it was the question from the shaman, you know, asking this guy, are they energy parasites? Is what this shaman is saying about them sucking your energy true? And that's what it reacted to. So anytime I got a negative reaction from the voices, I knew that I had something that was damaging them.
Right.
It's like almost any sentient being that is being harmed by something it will run or avoid it. And then I found out that every time I tried to point out to a patient that these things were energy parasites, they would go off in a heartbeat. But the patient needed to know that, because once they realized that these things were sucking their life energy, a whole different stance took place, a whole different way of seeing these things for them took place. You know, if you had a leech on you, and then somebody, you didn't recognize it as a leech, and somebody said, that's a leech, it's sucking your blood, you're going to want to get rid of it. They don't want that information out that they are energy parasites. And every single schizophrenic I've ever talked to, after the voices attacked and left, they were left drained, totally drained. So there was a one-to-one correlation.
There's
So
a
they
great
have to
series
turn the energy negative before they can take it. That's why the negative crap.
You might look into the paintings of Alex Gray, the great artist. He has a series of paintings of these insect-like creatures sucking the life off of people, boring deep with their tails, and they're really good depictions of these negative forces. I don't know if they're insect-like. I suspect they may be some kind of ethereal insect-like thing. It certainly feels like it. When people that tell me they feel like they're being, like, wasps are attacking them with these voices and everything. And so I don't know. I just know that, you know, you really did in a lot of ways crack it by admitting that the voices are real and that there's a way to dispense these voices. Those are the two great things. And all the people that are listening, that are hearing voices, and I think there's probably a lot of you, there are ways to do it. And another thing that reminds me of is that in the temples in Peru, the Inca had these resonating cavities built into the walls. And if you sit in front of the cavities and you just hum a high-pitched hum, it will bounce off the cavity and it separates and comes back into your ears. And for years, I've wondered what this was, you know, and now I think that maybe that's what that is. It's some way to hide or to get rid of the voices by using these kinds of meditative techniques, and also possibly yoga and Tao, practicing Taoism may help too. And Zen, of course, the whole point is to quiet the voice in the head and get it to shut up. So it's as if these Eastern practices were designed to help us deal with these archonic forces.
Well, yes. I mean, they come across as thoughts. Okay, so they're like fishermen. You know, they'll sit there and they have complete access to your entire memory. They can pull up every rotten thing that you've ever done, everything you feel guilty about that you haven't resolved yourself. And they can bait a hook with that and throw that over there and see if you'll bite on it. And if you bite on it, then they'll keep pushing it, and that generates that negative emotional energy. So what they're after is the negative emotional energy, and they have to turn it negative first. Now, along the same lines, when you're talking about an electrical energy, toward the end of my career, maybe the last 10 years, mostly when I was working in the emergency rooms during psych crisis, I could feel the presence of these things. I could feel how strong they were. I could feel how angry they were at me. And it was this strange, icky electrical feeling. There's no other feeling like it, you know.
I agree.
But I could sense when they were around, and patients couldn't lie to me. As you know, I'd ask them, "Are you hearing voices?" And they'd say, "No, I'm not." And I said, "Yes, you are, and this is how strong they are." And they'd go, "Well, how do you know that?" And I said, you know, they go, and when I started talking to them about what they were, they how do you know that? Were you crazy too? I mean, yeah, I guess you have to. It takes one to know one. But,
yeah, and we know from Emanuel Swedenborg's writings, and also the writings of, you know, modern day Robert Monroe,
yes.
that certain people have the ability to go out of their bodies, and and they can see this invisible world that we can't see in our waking state, and they report these entities and that they're everywhere and that they're negative, and there's positive ones too, of course. And and they're incredibly malevolent. That's what they all report back. That and we have to find ways. If you've accidentally let them in, tell us what people that are listening can do if somehow they have accidentally let these forces into their life and they want to get rid of them. What's the best way that they can go about doing things?
Well, to get on and stay on a positive spiritual path.
Agreed.
But everybody hears these things on top of the regular voice that's spinning in your head anyway. And the way they appear is you might be walking down the sidewalk, and then all of a sudden this horrible thought pops into your head that came out of nowhere. You know, it's like, well, smack the guy in front of you, or you know, do something outrageous, and it's something that's so bad that it just shocks you. It's like, where did that come from? It's not a thought that you would think or entertain or anything you would ever do. But here's his thought, like, why don't you do this? I remember a preacher telling me he was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and all of a sudden the thought came into his head to jump. And a number of patients have told me the same thing. You know, it happens to regular people all the time. And you go, where did that come from? That, you know, just the visceral reaction against it is proof enough that it didn't come from you.
So then we have to do, people should, create positive mantras and things and keep repeating it over and over when the voices start attacking, right?
Well, yeah, there's several levels of this. The voices are very persistent. I mean, you can't ignore them because they'll get louder, and that's consistent.
Wow.
What I noticed, and I was working with before Sherry came up with her That's a Lie program, was that most of what these things say is a lie. They're constantly feeding you lies. And like you said, they are persistently and constantly negative. So that's another thing psychiatry has totally ignored. And hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. They're positive, they're negative, they're neutral, they're just everything under the sun. These things are constantly and persistently negative. You have to ask yourself, what holds them and confines them to such a negative pattern? Why can't they ever break out of that? They're constantly negative. What holds them that way? So they're going to put negative thoughts in your head to try to get you upset, and then they will drain your energy. So if you look at depressed people, look at what they're thinking. It's a lot of negative stuff, and they don't have any energy. Same thing with schizophrenics. They don't have any energy. These things are looking for any way they can drain your energy. Now, I saw that they constantly tell lies. And what Sherry developed was, from that information, she pretty much said, any negative thought about yourself or anybody else that comes into your head is a lie. And you need to call it that. Call it a lie. And when you get a negative thought about you, say, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. Now, I made the mistake one day in the emergency room of talking to a floridly psychotic guy, thinking that everything that the voices said was a lie. So I told him, everything the voices tell you is a lie. And the voices came out and said, hey, look at that wall over there, right next to you. The wall is green, isn't it? And I said, well, yeah, it's green. Well, then that's not a lie, is it? And this is the voices. You know, I'm like, okay, got there. So I called Sherry and I said, well, hey, what's with this? I mean, you know, I know what you said is true. And she said, well, you carried it a little bit too far. It's not everything. It's everything they say about yourself or somebody else.
And they mix the truth in with the lie so that it becomes more convincing.
Yep, exactly right. So negative television, stay away from everything negative. You know, negative movies, murder mysteries, that stuff that you were driven away from. You know, the news is constantly negative stuff.
Even like really loud music is will drive you into that negative state. And so you got to be careful, even what kind of music you listen to, what
Yeah.
books you read,
Yes.
and you know, and movies. Um, uh, they're just so horrifying that they will put images in your head you can't get rid of. That's
Right.
the thing about movies, and why I'm, you know, Plato advocated that there would be a board of intellectuals which would examine art and make sure that negative art would not be let out into the public. And a lot of people think that's censorship, but I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if there shouldn't be a board of people making sure some of this stuff doesn't get out, because it's pretty dangerous and
Well,
it will drive you mentally ill.
well, I think you're right, especially these negative, violent video games that, you know,
Yes.
look at what's going on. A kid, by the time he's a teenager, has watched like, what, 130,000 murders on TV, war stories, and then these video games where they're murdering people and killing people. And then they wonder why, you know, all these things are teaching them the way to solve your problems is to get a gun and go shoot somebody.
Yep.
Yeah. So they try to take away the guns, and here they're training these kids to handle their problems with violence. They don't do anything about that, but they want to take away the guns.
And another thing that you really opened up is this whole idea that psychiatry is just going down the wrong road. It's not even going down the right road. It doesn't believe their patients when their patients tell them what's going on. So from the very beginning, psychiatrists aren't even listening to what the patients are saying. Then the patients become afraid to tell them that they're hearing voices, because they're just going to get more stronger and stronger drugs, which they don't want. And then the drugs, I guess, subdue the voices for a while, but then when you come off the drugs, the voices come back like from 10 voices to 100 voices, twice as loud. And so it's if the only answer is really a spiritual answer or a shamanic answer. And are there any practices that you can say or tell people what to do that at least start down this path? They're not going to find any psychiatrists like you around, so that's not going to work. So, I mean, is there any tradition or anything that you studied that would be a right path for
Well,
someone trying to get rid of these voices?
well, well, first of all, you got to realize that they're not you.
Right.
So they don't want you to know that. That's the last thing the voices want these patients to know,
That is
that
so
they're
important.
not them.
That is the most important part of the whole thing.
You know, and that's where psychiatry is just doing the people of this planet a grave disservice by saying their hallucinations, they're not real. You know, they're very real. And as long it's like having rattlesnakes in your bedroom at night and saying, oh, it's the hissing is just a hallucination. And as long as the person doesn't realize that these things are around and they're real, they're wide open. It's almost like, you know, some invisible person coming in your office and whacking you upside the head, and you don't see anything, and you think something's wrong with you. So psychiatry is telling them, you're the sick one because you're hearing these things. We don't want to hear anything you have to say, and you're exactly right on. The more they complain about the voices, the stronger they drug them. Those medicines cause a lot of damage. They rot out the patient's peripheral nervous system. They kill brain cells. They cause all kinds of awful side effects. So they're slowly poisoning these guys. And that's what the voices are telling these patients. The psychiatrist is poisoning you. Look at the side effects.
Well,
look at the akinesia. Look at the dry mouth. Look at the sexual dysfunction. Look at the shakiness. You know, look at all these side effects. You're being poisoned by these guys. Now, psychiatrists have a higher rate of attack by their patients than any other doctor. They are, and I saw that at the state hospital when I first got there too. And I'm like, why are they being attacked at such a rate?
Yep.
Number one is because, you know, they're giving these guys drugs that subdue the voices, and the voices don't. The first thing the voices go after is those drugs. They want them off those drugs, and the only reason those drugs work is because they calm them down. You know, it's hard to generate negative emotional energy when the person's calm. Psychiatry is such a scam. You know, they say, oh, we spend millions and billions of dollars developing these drugs. These antipsychotic drugs were discovered by accident in a dye lab in Europe. You know, and the ones they have today aren't significantly different from the ones, the Thorazine that they used to have. It's just less side effects. They spent nothing. It was an accidental discovery. And they were in this battle with neurology, and they were like the bottom dog, and they took over the control of these drugs, and now they're taking control of the entire mental health system. And look at the result. We got almost 50,000 people a year in the US killing themselves. They're suiciding. And this is among one of the most affluent societies on the planet. Why is that happening? It's not working. Their mental health thing, drugging people is not solving anything. It doesn't get at the problem. And they all through the 8 years of higher education I've had in graduate school and psych and counseling, they never mentioned spiritual anything. It was like they drew this line there. And it was like, okay, this is psychology and this is spirituality, and the two will never cross. So you didn't even bring it up. And the higher you got, the worse it got. It's just like, we know the answers. But then you look at the statistics of there was an organization that did a survey of the number of psychologist articles that were printed in research, and found out that 90% of them were not able to be replicated. Wow. So they're printing garbage.
Yeah.
You know?
So before we go, I got one question for you before we go. Has you ever considered the idea that maybe like psychedelics, like magic mushrooms might have some kind of effect on these people? Or, I don't know, maybe it'll magnify it. I don't know.
Yes. I think it would magnify it. And it would be bad. Now like you said, Ouija boards are very dangerous. I've met in my career, I've met a lot of patients who started with Ouija boards, but one that I'm getting reports on constantly are these spirit boxes, where they can actually talk to the spirit through these boxes.
Right.
I've got a number of people that are reporting, hey, listen, I started talking to this voice through this box, and now it's inside of me and I can't get rid of it, and they are now psychotic. The single most dangerous drug is amphetamine. That opens people up. I've seen so many people come into the ER and go into prison and because they started using meth. It's like it cracks open some kind of spiritual protection you have, and these things just jump right in and take over.
I'm glad you said that, because I've known a number of meth heads, and they definitely had voices in their head, and you could actually almost hear them. And so you're right. I'm glad you mentioned that. Meth is a huge opener of the doors to this parallel universe where good and bad entities live, and they are out there. I'm going to do some more shows about this, because I think this is like some of the most important subject that we can talk about. I'd like to have you back on, if possible, to discuss this further, because I think where you're going with this as a psychiatrist, it's gold, absolutely gold. You're the first guy to actually come out and say that this is actually a spiritual problem, and it cannot be solved with drugs. No. And the book is An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind by Gerry Marzinski and Sherry Swiney. And Sherry is the one that came up with the plans for how to get rid of these entities and how to get them to shut up. And it's basically, they aren't always telling a lie, but most of the time they're bending the truth, and you just have to tell them you don't believe them anymore, no matter what.
We've got both ends covered with Sherry, because she, as a young woman, she struggled with these voices for years, and they almost killed her. And she found that that's a lie program, which is, I was working with that concept, but she really clarified it.
It really is a good concept.
Now, the other thing that works, if you can do it, is to send these things love.
There you go.
And it's universal love. So you talk about it's not like romantic love. Now, I've never been able to do that because of the carnage I've seen these things do, but Sherry has. And I've seen others who have. They just say, I send you love. And these things just bolt.
It's funny, because I'll go, I live in a very a new age town, you might say. Everybody's into some form of spirituality. And I'll go to parties and things, and they'll always do a meditation, banish all your negative thoughts, you know, think only love. And every time I'm at these parties, I'm like, I don't have any negative thoughts. Why am I banishing them? And now I realize what's really going on is these people actually are having negative thoughts, and they've got practices that they use to banish them, you know, through ritual or whatever. And so people are all finding their way. But what's great about what you did was that you kind of opened the closet, you know, said, no, this is what is going on. You know, believe that the voices are real, believe that they're not you, and understand that everything they're saying is a bending of the truth in some way to suck negative energy out, suck energy out of you so that you're in a subdued, fallen state, because that's what they want. You're like in ICU. You're always in intensive care and you can't get out of it. And the only way to do it is to buy this book and follow what it says to do, because there's no other books that I've ever found that lock those two things together, psychiatry and a very advanced esoteric concepts, actually. Thank you, Jerry. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
I'll have you back, okay?
Oh, you bet. Thank you.
Thank you.